Hello, I'm Philip Brunelle, choir master, organist at Plymouth Congregational Church in Minneapolis, and founder and artistic director of Vocal Lessons. So each day here in Guildhall, I'm focusing on a different composer, and in each case, it's a composer that has been heard both at Plymouth Church in an anthem and at Vocal Lessons in a concert, or many concerts. So today, it's a composer that we had in one of the early times with Witness. Witness is a concert series that focuses on music of African American composers or composers of African background and lineage. And one of the first ones that we ever featured was a man from England named Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. Samuel was born of an English mother, and the father was Sierra Leone Creole. He was born in 1875 and studied with the eminent English composer Charles Villiers Stanford. Elgar also loved his music and recommended him to a concert at the Three Choirs Festival. The piece that he was most known for, written about 1900, was a piece called Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, based on the story of Hiawatha. He came 3 times to the USA, where he was known and revered as the African Mahler. He visited the White House at the invitation of President Theodore Roosevelt. And of course, this was in 1904, and at that time, not a lot of African Americans were invited to visit the president, but he was. He was fascinated by music from his lineage in Sierra Leone, and so a lot of music of his brings that tradition to bear. Now, the piece that we did with Vocal Lessons was actually a concert down at the State Theater, and it was a piece called Bon Bon Suite. It's a set of movements. We did several of them with orchestra and chorus. It was poetry of Thomas Moore, and I love the fact that it was dedicated to a woman named Miss Doris Sunshine. So this movement is the one called The Watchman, and it begins with just this bell ringing, and it's a low bell, so it rings 12 times. It's a very much of that period when it was the music was very atmospheric and descriptive. So you have 12 counts, then the baritone sings, "Good night, my dear, how fast the moments fly. 'Tis time to part, you hear the hateful watchman's cry." But they don't want to separate. And then you hear a single bell for 1 o'clock, and then you hear 2 o'clock, and then finally 3 o'clock, and they realize they must part. And of course, each of those is the baritone saying good night, good night. And the last one, he has to hold it for an incredibly long time as he says good night. Samuel Coleridge-Taylor also composed a number of piano pieces. And I, of course, one of the things I love to do is go into antiquarian music shops. So I was in one in London some years ago looking for music of Coleridge-Taylor. It was a hyphenated last name. And I found a charming little set of 4 characteristic waltzes. Coleridge-Taylor, by the way, did not live long. He died when he was in his 30s of pneumonia, but he left a wonderful legacy of music. The big challenge he had, of course, was that he was very generous as a man, and he often would just give the music away without getting any kind of payment for him. Because of that, when he died, he was penniless, and his wife and children also, of course, had to suffer. But folks came to his rescue, and in fact, the king at that time was so fond of him that they gave Mrs. Coleridge-Taylor an amount of money each year as long as she lived. He also did concerts in London, and one of them that was very famous was a concert of traditional African music with the poet Paul Laurence Dunbar, the famous African-American poet. And one of the things that he liked to do was, as I mentioned earlier, to take themes that might be a melody from, say, Sierra Leone and work it into a classical style. He said, this is what Brahms did, and I want to do something the same. So here is a rustic waltz from his 4 characteristic waltzes. Have a wonderful day.